Okay, now we can start. Today, I'm happy to have Dr. Qiang Tang from the University of Sydney here to give this talk. Qiang is currently a senior lecturer at the University of Sydney. Before joining Sydney, he was an assistant professor at New Jersey Institute of Technology and also the director of Jacobi Blockchain Lab. Before that, he was a postdoc at Cornell with Lin Shi, and also he obtained his PhD from Qiang University of Connecticut in 2015, and his supervisors were Achilles Qiang and also Alexander Russell. His research spanned broadly in applied and theoretical cryptography and blockchain technologies. His work mostly appeared in the flagship venues of security and cryptography and distributed computing. For example, Crypto CCS, Eurocrypt, NDSS, and PODC, and many more. He won a few prestigious awards, including the MIT Technical Review 35 Chinese Innovators Under 35 in 2019, a Google Faculty Award, and the NJIT Research Awards in 2020, and a few others. Today, he will talk about Dumbo, the flying elephant, right? Okay, I pass the stage to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the nice introduction, and also thanks for the invitation in general, Professor Dong. And I'm very happy to talking to the colleagues in UK. And actually, I'm as Qiang just mentioned, right? One of my supervisor, PhD supervisor, Agnes, was now in Edinburgh, so I kind of a student affiliated with the UK University as well. And today I'm going to talk about our recent actually sequence of work making asynchronous consensus practical. We call it the Dumbo protocols, or maybe Dumbo protocol family. And today, I guess the situation is much better for blockchain as like then maybe 7-8 years, we try to convince people to work in this domain. Right now, it's almost sometimes beyond the hype. When the massive media comes in, we often see and hear all kind of magic properties on blockchain. But whatever it is, whatever they are, at the end of the day, we need some kind of technical protocols to enforce and realize them, right? And our group did quite amount of work on blockchain, and I personally categorize them into 3 categories. And on the upper layer is like a decentralized applications. Given whatever we have as a blockchain, what kind of new and nice applications we can design, we can consider. While on the lower layer, because of this new decentralized applications, essentially ask a lot of new questions for crypto, where we need to design all kind of cryptographic tools to provide better support. While at the core of the core, or maybe the blockchain layer itself, normally people say the consensus protocol, and which is the focus we're gonna do today. Well, as a disclaimer, this is the 3 layers, just my personal biased categorization. There are many other layers in blockchain research as well, right? For example, like a game theory, program analysis, or even lower networking layers. I just didn't touch them in our group. The consensus problem actually is one of the most classical problem in computer science, right? It's been essentially studied for almost 40 years in the distributed computing community, and there are many variants of it. The basic definition of consensus is actually very simple. Every node each have some input transactions, they communicate, they want to reach agreement on some common digital log, while in a more fancy term today is called digital ledger, right? One normal property of a consensus, or maybe we call it atomic broadcast, they satisfy some safety and liveness property. But safety basically said all the honest guys' ledgers are more or less the same, while the liveness basically said every honest guy's input will be recorded sooner or later. I assume most of you are familiar with this basic definition. Well, even though this problem has been studied in the community for many years, Bitcoin is kind of first time to brought it to a qualitatively different scenario, which is the open internet, But conventionally, the consensus problem or BFT protocols are mostly deployed in smaller scale data centers, for example. Well, now it's a new era. We need to consider deploying consensus on the actual massive scale on the open internet, which is much more complicated scenario. Like any of the secure system problem, right? Like the most natural challenges, we want to make consensus as fast as possible and at the same time as secure as possible. Particularly now, blockchain support a lot of financial applications. Security really means money immediately, right? Even though like in secure system, we always say there are some disasters, but people may don't feel it. In the blockchain domain, maybe, for example, DeFi, if you have a security vulnerability, then money loses immediately, which is of course bad, but also good from the public awareness point of view. And today's protocol, we are trying to introduce arguably most resilient type of a consensus protocol, which will also show, we want to show how to push their efficiency as much as possible. As you probably are familiar with, like all the blockchain consensus protocol essentially kind of can be categorized into two types, depending what kind of network assumption they depend on. Like synchronous consensus rely on assumption that all message will be delivered within some time. That's called normally, if the consensus protocol have to rely on such kind of timing assumption, we call it the synchronous protocol. There are also weaker variants like a weakly synchronous or partially synchronous protocol, all have this type of timing assumption. Well, this type of synchronous protocol might be okay when we deploy consensus in the smaller scale and the well-connected data centers in the conventional setting, right? But now we are talking about deploying consensus in the internet. The nodes might be spread across the globe and even in different continents, right? The internet environment might be much more diverse, and it might be too optimistic to assume internet to be synchronous, and let alone maybe there are all kinds of different devices. What's worse is that actually several recent papers actually show that if the network is indeed some kind of denial of service attack was launched on a small number of nodes, the synchronous protocol might be able to get, the synchronous consensus might be completely get stuck if only a small number of nodes get denial of service attack. Actually, a more horrifying consequence is a very recent paper, I think it's the last CCS. Some researchers show that actually Bitcoin protocol under the asynchronous attack might even have a double spending problem. So essentially, this rings alarms that synchronous protocols might have all kinds of security issues when they are deployed in the potentially asynchronous internet. So this calls for asynchronous consensus which we don't need to rely on any of this timing assumption, right? Like as long as the message delivers. And actually, this type of seemingly most resilient asynchronous consensus protocol also offers some performance benefit because we don't need to rely on any time parameters, right? And the asynchronous consensus actually proceeds whenever the network delivers. It achieves some kind of advanced property called responsiveness. Because in synchronous protocol, sometimes you need to conservatively choose the time parameter to be very large, that actually the performance might be actually inferior. And the other interesting feature of asynchronous protocol is actually, if you have ever built a large scale distributed system yourself, probably you don't want to remember the nightmares when you do all the careful, frustrating manual timeout mechanisms. So given this summary, it looks like asynchronous consensus is really offers like better security and the kind of a promise for even better performance. Unfortunately, the fact that most of the existing consensus protocol that has been deployed are kind of a synchronous type of protocols. That means they might be vulnerable to all kinds of network attacks. I would like to mention that it is not that probably those platforms do not want to deploy asynchronous consensus protocol. It's simply because they are too complicated. One hint actually from the very classical result called FLP impossibility, they already hinted that back to the 80s, they hinted that there's no deterministic protocol can ever exist for asynchronous consensus. So over the years, people have actually spent a lot of efforts designing all kinds of randomized protocols to circumvent this impossibility. Those classical results are mostly theoretical in nature. Actually, essentially, none of them have ever been implemented or deployed in real life. But until very recently, because the Bitcoin kind of inspired us to consider deploying consensus in the open internet, right? People start to seriously wonder, can such asynchronous consensus protocol ever be practical? One of the most visible result probably is a Honey Badger BFT. They kind of optimize a classical protocol due to Bonor et al. And provided an implementation showing actually promising performance. By the way, Honey Badger is also one result come from my academic family, but we give a more affirmative answer to this question. Yes, we can in this sequence of Dumbo protocols. As you all know that yes, we can was originally a political slogan, since we are not running a presidential campaign. And I just ran away from a place that was used to have a president don't care about science at all, right? So I will be try to be more, as precise as possible and provide scientific justifications why we say yes we can. Well, indeed we can, but do need some efforts. So before we go into the details, and I would like to give a very high level overview of this, how we got this Dumbo family evolved from the beginning. Well, the real starting point is really actually two classic, or the two famous work, one due to Qiang et al., which has the one major building block called MVBA, which I will be explaining soon, and the Honey Badger. They kind of each have a different pros and cons, and Qiang et al.'s work kind of focused on the constant running time, but they have a very large communication complexity, while Honey Badger, they optimize the communication to an extent, but kind of sacrifice the running time. So our starting point is starting from the first Dumbo protocol. Maybe now we should call it the Dumbo Classic. In the back to CCS20, we kind of have the best of both. We have both optimal communication, and at the same time, we also do not have to sacrifice the running time. And at the same time, we also kind of answer the open problem from Qiang et al. We gave a essentially optimal construction of this important MVBA protocol, which originally have a massive amount of communication. Then we continue the path, kind of reduce the complexity of other metric again, and for the Dumbo Classic protocol, and we kind of compressed the whole protocol structure to make the concrete Dumbo runs also almost clear to the extreme. And recently, we also kind of take a holistic approach that open the box and kind of design a new protocol we call NG that actually try to solicitate all available bandwidths, kind of to make the best use of the bandwidth, and to push up the throughput without actually sacrificing latency. And most recently, we finally preserve all the nice properties and design the asynchronous protocol that almost as fast as a synchronous counterpart, for example, like a hotstop. And today I will focus on where we start, the first work and also the latest one we call both Dumbo Transformer. So first, let's have a very high-level overview of Honey Badger. Actually, the major insights from Honey Badger actually they observe that there's something called asynchronous common subset, because in the traditional consensus definition is everyone have an input transaction and they're going to output one of them. But asynchronous common subset by definition is everyone have one single input, but they're going to output a common subset of them. So in this way, obviously, going to be good for batching, right? You're going to output a lot of things instead of one single transaction. So it's going to be good to improve throughput and reduce communication complexity in general. And more interestingly, this common subset protocol can be actually built from the simplest version, which is binary asynchronous Byzantine agreement. If we peel off all the unnecessary complexities of the Honey Badger BFT, actually the backbone of a Honey Badger BFT is fairly simple. The structure is fairly simple. The first, everyone basically broadcasts its own transaction to everyone using something called the reliable broadcast. Here it's called RBC. basically means reliable broadcast. It's a special type of broadcast protocol that have a guarantee that if any one honest node receives a transaction, actually all honest guy will receive it eventually. So just a variant of a broadcast protocol. And after the broadcast phase, that's normal, right? Everyone just broadcast to everyone the transaction. Then they're gonna use a binary agreement to decide whether we should output each individual transactions. This ABA is a binary agreement in the asynchronous consensus. The asynchronous binary agreement, basically like ABA1 is used to determine whether we should output transaction 1, while ABA2 is used to jointly determine whether we should output transaction 2, right? Just do this one binary agreement for each transaction to determine whether they should output it or not. That's it. So this overall structure is actually seems like fairly simple, right? Just broadcast, then vote. We should output it or not. Since we promised to make it actually practical, right? Then let's first examine what's the actual bottleneck in Honey Badger BFT. Well, the inspiration again comes from FLP, because binary asynchronous consensus, asynchronous binary agreement, which is the ABA thing, itself is also asynchronous protocols, so it has to be randomized again. If we look at the second phase of the Honey Badger BFT, essentially we concurrently run a large number of instances of randomized protocols, right? Well, if we just look a little bit more carefully, when we concurrently execute the large number of randomized protocol, the whole procedure is going to stop at the slowest instance, right? Some of the instance might have a 4 rounds, some of them might have 100 rounds, and some may start earlier, some might end later. The bad news is that actually, if the number of instances is large enough, there is essentially indeed there must be a slow instance. It's a simple probability calculation, right? If we do the actual calculation, the number of rounds indeed depend on the number of nodes. And we even run experiment to test our conjecture. While the experiment not only clearly demonstrate our observation, it also offers us a very clear insight. So here, the blue column essentially is the time cost of the voting procedure running the binary agreement, while the red column is the first phase of everyone broadcast to everyone. If we look at the picture, right, the binary agreement not only is slow, it's actually the dominating fraction, that takes the dominating fraction of the whole protocol execution. So now with this picture, actually, our task becomes simple, right? We just need to cut this blue column. That's already a very substantial improvement. So our goal in the Dumbo classical protocol, basically, we want to try to push the number of binary agreement to minimum. But if we look at the Honey Badger again, the binary agreement essentially is a voting procedure, right? They jointly need to vote and decide whether a certain transaction should be output or not. Looks like this voting procedure is needed anyway. But if we want to reduce the number of binary agreements, then we must make this voting procedure more effective, right? So in Honey Badger BFT, they vote essentially for each individual input transactions. To make it more effective, we probably need a better voting procedure that instead of voting on one, can we vote on a set of the values? Because at the end of the day, we just need to output one single, a set of the input transactions, right? So this brings the primitive called MVBA, which is multi-valued validated Byzantine agreement into our mind. Because now, let's observe that after the broadcast phase, actually, because everyone broadcasts to everyone, right? After waiting enough time, actually everyone is already have a vector of values because everyone is broadcast to everyone. If you just wait enough, you're gonna have a vector of input values already. Then since everyone have that input value already, we can just vote on this vector, right? But now the challenge is binary in the asynchronous setting, the Byzantine agreement, the multi-valued Byzantine agreement is actually extremely difficult. It's essentially impossible to have exponential complexity if we require the strong validity for whatever definition it is. So that's why we bring this a weaker version called a validated Byzantine agreement. So this whole box is first, they can take a multi-valued Byzantine agreement, but this is a validated version, basically means the output could even come from a malicious node, but the output has to satisfy a certain condition or maybe a certain predicate. That's why it's called a validated Byzantine agreement, right? Any questions so far? I mean, if you have any question, just interrupt me.
Yeah, I have one question. Who proposed this set?
So everyone have a vector values, right? Everyone take this vector as his own input. Then we're gonna run this protocol. This protocol gonna determine one output.
Okay, yeah.
Just view this MVBA as a box.
Okay, yeah.
So the first nice thing of MVBA is that actually they only need to run like 3 binary agreements because the voting procedure is completely different. But there are 2 immediate challenges. First, because the output can come from a malicious guy, right? How do we guarantee if we output this malicious node's vector, how can we guarantee all the honest guy will receive the same value, the agreement property? And for this, actually, we can design. We augmented the broadcast phase with a kind of special proof in a way that if anyone who sees a proof, that guarantees every honest guy will be able to receive this value. So, and we can design this predicate according to this proof. So if the malicious guy's vector does not satisfy this predicate, then we simply discard. Because the MVB protocol at least guarantees the output satisfy the predicate, right? So as long as the output indeed contains the valid proof, then we can guarantee every honest guy will eventually receive the same value. And this proof actually can be easily realized just by threshold signature. The guarantee is as long as enough people receive it, then the RPC can provide this kind of guarantee. But there's another more subtle issue. Actually, this MVBA protocol was proposed even 20 years ago by Qiang et al., right? And Honey Badger BFT actually explicitly abandoned this path because MVBA protocol may cause communication blow up. But actually, in our design, we pay a particular attention to this. When we actually invoke MVBA protocol, the input does not really carry the data load. We only input after the broadcast phase, we only input the index and the very succinct, the proof generated by threshold signature. So in this way, we can avoid the communication blow up by MVBA protocols, while at the same time inherit all the nice property of MVBA, which has only run like 3 or 4 binary agreement instances. So this actually mimics the classical paradigm, like in cryptography, like hybrid encryption, right? Like PKE is nice, but it's heavy. But the symmetric encryption is not flexible, but it's cheap. So essentially, we leverage a heavy sub-protocol in a subtle way so that we can avoid the efficiency drawback, but also carry all the nice property of it. So after this protocol, we can essentially reduce the binary agreement to minimum because just 2 or 3, and we preserve all the optimal communication complexity as Honey Badger BFT. And we did the experiment, run large-scale experiment in real life, and actually the performance clearly supports our protocol design. So first, we can easily see that actually original Dumbo have 2 protocols. I only explained the Dumbo 2, forget about Dumbo 1 because Dumbo 2 is better. And when the scale goes up, and we can see the latency of Honey Badger gets the delay going to get larger and larger, while the Dumbo 2 slowly get larger. It's still larger, but slowly get larger. While for throughput, here we can always increase the batch. That's a nice technique from Honey Badger is that we can always increase the batch size to increase the peak throughput. And we can see from the figure that the Honey Badger actually the protocol gets stuck fairly soon because the protocol itself is heavy, while the Dumbo 2 can continue approach a higher throughput. And the concrete number also supports our etc. You can just take a look, and all the experiments actually was done without any optimization. We again done some breakdown of this protocol component, which again justifies our protocol design philosophy. If you look at the Honey Badger, the number of slow instances is actually not small, but in Dumbo 2, the number of slow instances become only maybe 1. Like, so the overall protocol is not impacted by the slowest instance. If we leave away these technical details, the takeaway message for the Dumbo classical protocol is actually fairly simple. It's a kind of a new design methodology. In order to construct the practical asynchronous consensus protocol, we know this common subset is a good stuff, right? But there are various different ways to construct this common subset. The one classical protocol is use RPC and a lot of binary agreement. Actually was back to Benoit at all, a very classical technique. And there's also another technique using MVBA directly to construct ACS, which cause a large communication blow-up. Actually, you might even also leverage MVBA directly to construct atomic broadcast, but just every time you just output one single value. Obviously, it's not good for batching. And the Honey Badger kind of explicitly taken the ABA path because they want to avoid the large communication blow-up because of the heavy MVBA, while our Dumbo protocol somehow shows the path via MVBA is actually might be a better path because if you carefully design, because this view might be too optimistic, even though MVBA is heavy, we can still use it in a smarter way that the overall protocol is much, much better. Right? Actually, we also opened the box of MVBA itself. Sorry, let me see. MVBA itself, that we actually find out the communication of MVBA itself might not need to be that heavy anyway. So basically, the Dumbo protocol kind of shows, these two put together actually shows MVBA is actually the right path for asynchronous consensus protocols. So far, so good. But are we done here? We will have a better asynchronous consensus, which is faster than Honey Badger, which is also very decent throughput. Well, actually, it's too early to be happy, to be completely happy, because so far all this asynchronous consensus is still in kind of in favor of throughput, while with the sacrifice over latency if the scale goes up. If we look at this latency chart again, so it looks pretty, the Dumbo looks pretty good compared to Honey Badger, right? But if we just extract out this slope for the blue line, and we compare with hot stuff, with the deterministic synchronous protocols, then this blue line would not look that promising and that kind of making people so happy, right? If we can, as we can see, the deterministic synchronous protocols, for example, hot stuff, their latency is really at the minimum, even if the scale goes up. While because their protocol is just a few fixed number of runs, but the Dumbo, despite its large improvement, still is a randomized protocol. It's fairly complicated, larger number of runs, and it's randomized, right? Because there are all kind of unpredictability. So when the scale goes up, the latency still need to be multiple, like at 40, 50s, right? 50 seconds. It's not something completely acceptable. But essentially, if we think again, think this question more deeply, this actually reflects a more fundamental dilemma we are facing in the consensus design. If we want to go with this synchronous protocol, they can be deterministic, they can be really fast, but they might not have all the security issues. Like they might not have the security guarantee. For example, they may not have aliveness, they can get completely stuck, right? On the other hand, the asynchronous protocols, they are randomized protocol, they are robust, they can be secure even in the asynchronous setting, but they have to be randomized because of the FLP impossibility. And this randomization, in some sense, makes the protocol kind of complicated and slower. Do we have to, we are facing a challenge essentially, do we have to give up either security or efficiency? While as a computer scientist, we are normally greedy, right? It's not some kind of option we normally take. We normally want both. So the next question we're going to be explaining, we're trying to tackle is, can we get the best of both of these two types of asynchronous, the synchronous protocol? Basically, can we design an asynchronous protocol which can be as fast as synchronous protocol, at least in most of the time? So let's how something called optimistic asynchronous consensus come into play. Well, the idea is actually fairly simple. And basically, in most of the times, we run some super fast deterministic some protocol, we call it fastly. Since this guy has no security guarantee, right? Whenever there's a security issue, we run another protocol called asynchronous fallback. We fall back to a more robust asynchronous protocol and we use that as a security fallback. And essentially, we can view it as a kind of asynchronous version of view change. This nice concept actually was proposed very early, like 20 years back by Kusawa Shup and Ramazani and Kashim. The basic rationale is that real world internet might not be fluctuating at every single second, right? It might be stable for a while, then get bad, and maybe stable again. So we try to harvest all this like stable times to make progress as much as possible. But this diagram might be overly simplistic to reflect the complexity of optimistic asynchronous consensus. The actual structure is actually much more complicated. Let me try to explain in a very high level. So basically, the fast lane normally is some kind of broadcast protocol, just continuous broadcast or multicast. And whenever there's an issue, there's a timeout. If you don't receive the corresponding value, right, then they just complain. We try to enter the fallback mechanism. But the first tricky thing appears is maybe like Changyu stop at the block 100, my local chain stop at the block 10. We have to agree where we're gonna enter the fallback mechanism and restart together, right? We cannot be like Changyu restart at a block 100 and I restart at block 10. Then obviously we have a disagreement in some sense, right? But if we think again, essentially we need to agree on a place to restart. This is already, but this is in the asynchronous setting, right? This pace synchronization is already some kind of multi-valued Bayesian agreement protocol, right? Because the input at least is the index, right? Like 10, 100, something like that. At least a variant of it. Itself is already complicated. And then we need to run like more heavier asynchronous protocol to catch up and make real progress, then go back to the fast lane. And those challenge actually was conquered in these two seminar results by using the heavy MVB protocol directly with large input. As we explained before, this component is nice, but has very heavy communication blow up, particularly when the input size is large. Let me try to convince you without actually demonstrating the details. So despite a lot of progress in the MVB protocols, if you look at the protocol, right, it's not something you would like to see in 10 minutes. And it is also not something can be easily explained in a short period of time. In general, the protocol structure is very, very complicated, and the delay going to be, the number of rounds going to be very large. But this is not only a theoretical issue of high complexity, actually have an immediate impact on practical performance. Because if we think about the original motivation of this optimistic asynchronous consensus, right? We try to harvest the stable internet as much as possible. But if the space synchronization alone is super slow, a lot of the efforts from the optimistic block actually simply got wasted, right? If we look at this simple picture, even if the network is stable majority of the time, this overall protocol will still be much, much slower than the synchronous protocol itself, if we just keep running the optimistic fast lane, right? Basically, we need, the challenge we're facing is, can we have a super cheap asynchronous pace synchronization? And one question actually I would like to raise now is, you can think of what would be the cheapest possible pace synchronization, because they are already a variant of asynchronous consensus protocol. I just leave the question for you to think for 2 minutes. Probably you get the answer very soon. So for this reason, we propose a new general framework called Dumbo Transformer. The name is a bit fancy, but the idea is the structure is similar. So BOT is just, again, another fast lane, but have a nice property we're going to provide. While Dumbo here basically means is not Dumbo, not specifically our Dumbo protocol. It means any asynchronous consensus protocol as a fallback mechanism. While the interesting feature is the transformer, which we want to make it as efficient as possible. And we want to push it to be conceptually as minimal as possible as an asynchronous pace synchronization. So the first immediate improvement we can do is we just use the recent improvement like a Dumbo classic to replace the pessimistic pass, right? The fallback pass. That's easy. But the real interesting idea in this Dumbo transformer, or maybe BDT for short, is that we need to provide kind of a new abstraction for the fast lane to enable a cheapest possible transformer. So in a way that we can make the fast lane, first, of course, the fast lane should be fast. That's the minimum basic requirement. But we can give it like very tiny property that we can prepare the protocol in a way that we can leverage the simplest or cheapest possible asynchronous pace synchronization. Yeah, if anyone already figured out what's the cheapest possible asynchronous pace synchronization, you feel free to type in the chat or just let me know. And the answer will be revealed probably in maybe just a few slides. So first, what's the new abstraction of fastlane we're gonna have? It's something called a notarizable weak atomic broadcast. You don't need to remember the names because too many names. The only thing you need to remember is that first, it will be a full-fledged atomic broadcast, but only in the optimistic case. The optimistic case basically means it's synchronous network and the leader is honest. While in any other cases, for example, the network become asynchronous or the leader become malicious, the whole protocol is simply handicapped, has no guarantee on safety, has no guarantee on liveness. So basically we give up all the security guarantee only to gain any performance in the good cases. So this intuitively make the protocol very simple, right? So it could be very fast for fastlane. But we ask one more property. The only property we ask is something called notarizability. What does notarizability mean? It's actually a very simple property. Basically, anyone output a block with certain certificate or proof, whatever. So we consider a valid block contains a certificate that can be publicly verifiable. Anyone output it, even including the malicious guys. That means at least majority of the honest guys already output the previous block. So that's the only guarantee that we call notarizability. And since if you look at this definition, it can be actually very easily realized by simple, like the very standard technique, like a quorum certificate, right? If as long as enough honest guy endorse the certificate or current block, that means he received the previous block already. So basically, we can have a very easy instantiation of such notarizable weak atomic broadcast. Basically, it's essentially just a multicast protocol with certain proofs. The proof essentially can be realized by threshold signature again. Super simple. Just continuously multicast, collect proof, multicast, collect proof. That's it. Kind of simplest possible protocol. And similarly, we can also have another version, provable, reliable broadcast, just for different trade-offs. But again, this seemingly minimum property, but we're going to show you if we analyze them carefully, they actually can enable a cheapest possible transformer, or again, this cheapest possible asynchronous pace synchronization. Let me just try to walk you through the protocol design idea. Actually, it might look a little bit complicated from the beginning, but actually when you work together, every single step is very simple. So the bold protocol is just a deterministic multicast, right? It's kind of everyone just multicast. But whenever an honest node didn't receive a corresponding a valued value for in a given time, then he simply complains. For example, I already have like a block 100, but I wait for enough time, but I didn't get the block 111. No, 101. Then I just complain. I get stuck. Let's try to run the fallback mechanism. So I just use index 100 as input. If anyone receives enough complaints, like essentially majority of the guys are complaining, then basically everyone gonna enter the fallback phase and use the largest index as input to run this pace synchronization protocol. Two very quick note, right? If majority of the honest guy does not make progress, actually no one will be able to make progress, because in order to make progress, we need to collect proofs or certificate for every single block. Every single block need to enough people to endorse it. So if a majority honest guy don't make progress, they will not endorse next block, right? So everyone gonna complain. So let's just a sanity check. And if majority of honest guys still making progress, probably they will not enter the fallback mechanism, right? Then if just one node, for example, he got isolated just by himself, then he can easily just call for help, right? Let's ask the other guy send me the latest block. He can easily validate the certificate because just signatures. The actual interesting part is we're gonna answer next is this seemingly simplest possible notarizability property. How does this property actually prepare all the honest node for running this fallback mechanism, essentially the transformer mechanism? Let's just simply examine the input pattern of it. Let's suppose the largest valid index of the honest block, let's say is V. Among all the honest index, there's the largest one, right? Let's just simply assume is V. So the first claim I'm going to make is that every other honest node input index at least gonna be V minus 1. Why that's the case? Because of notarizability, right? We said anyone who output at the block V, valid block V, that means at least enough people output at the block V minus 1. That's just simply definition of notarizability. So far, okay. And if we remember that the condition to enter this fallback mechanism or transformer mechanism is that honest node receive enough complaints. So let's call the honest node who has at least a V minus 1 as set, we call it good. And for every node, you're gonna receive a bunch of complaint. We call the complaint set as C. Just simple pigeonhole theorem, right? These two sets gonna intersect with at least one honest guy. So that means every honest guy's input index gonna be V minus 1. Simple. Because we have every honest guy will pick the largest one from the complaint set. Simple as that. So that's the first claim. Does not show the whole picture yet. But so next claim I would like to make is actually no one gonna complain with index larger than V plus 1. So I said enough honest guy will input at V minus 1, but no one gonna input at V plus 1. That's also actually very simple. Just by definition of notarizability, if anyone output at the V plus 1, that means enough honest guy at least receive the previous block, right, which is exactly V plus 1. This kind of contradicts the original definition of V, which is the largest index of all the honest blocks. So this two simple claim maybe sound a little bit tedious, but already give you a very simple, a very nice statement. Now all the honest guys indexes already their option originally from 1 to largest possible V, right? A largest possible index kind of already narrowed down to just possible V minus 1, V and V plus 1. So now you probably can get a guess what would be the conceptually minimum asynchronous pace synchronization protocol, which is the transformer protocol, which they're gonna be, right? But we want to push it even more. So now we narrow down to v-1, v and v+1. We're gonna continue. We're gonna make next claim. If no malicious node complain at the v+1, then actually no one gonna complain at it. The idea is simple because honest guy's largest input is v, right? If no malicious guy complain at the v+1, everyone gonna be complain at most v or v-1. So we rule out v+1 in this condition. And similarly, if one malicious guy complain at v+1, that we can rule out v-1. Similarly, we can do a simple implication just by call the notarizability again, because if the malicious node complain at v+1, that means he at least received v+1. That means enough honest node already received v, and this enough node, let's call it the better set, and intersect with the complaint set again. That means all the honest guy will input at v. So by summarizing all those claims, actually we can see that just one single notarizability property and the preparation of the certificate, we can kind of narrow down all the possible input of honest guy when they enter the pace synchronization phase. Their input could be either v-1v or v+1. That's it. There's no other options. So now the answer to my question already clear, right? So basically we can simply use the binary agreement, just the simplest possible binary agreement to run for this pace synchronization. Well, of course, it's not directly, just do a very trivial mapping, right? Like we'll just do mod 2, then v-1, v gonna become 0, 1. So essentially, we just need to, the pace synchronization just need to determine we should add the v-v or v+1, just pick one value out of it. So this can be easily realized just by a variant of a asynchronous binary agreement, which is already conceptually the minimum of all asynchronous consensus protocol, because input is just 0, 1. Okay, so I guess that's the most interesting piece of meat. There's some more subtle technical details. Maybe I think I can skip in order to avoid many of you fell asleep. But there are some other technical details. But if you are interested, we can definitely talk more offline or maybe at the end of the talk. The real interesting message, or maybe the summary again, is this picture. So the real key idea or observation we make is we can provide a new abstraction, or we call it BOAT, which to begin with is a handicapped protocol. It doesn't provide any guarantee, right? But only guarantee is something called notarizability, which is simple, extremely simple, and just can be realized by simple threshold proofs. And this simple property can actually enable the simplest possible asynchronous pace synchronization protocol, essentially just running a binary agreement. While originally, if we remember, the seminal works, they all have to use the multi-valued Bazini agreement, which is much more complicated. And there are many other nice features about the whole result. For example, this is a generic framework, right? So any progress in binary agreement or in the pessimistic past the asynchronous protocol itself, we can simply replace the instance to make a better use of it. And another interesting feature is that actually we do not have to, unlike other, or maybe the classical two protocols, they didn't do a fine-grained modularization. They always have to run the pessimistic path to recover, but maybe we can do a more fine-grained separation. So in case there are some progress, we do not have to run the pessimistic path at all, just directly go back to the fast lane. Basically have a faster switch. Yeah. One interesting note is there are some concurrent work called the Jordan and Ditto from Facebook Novi. Now Novi doesn't exist anymore, but at that time from their group, they also have a similar idea, try to get a fallback for hot stuff directly. So they have a very concrete construction optimizing the fallback mechanism for, or maybe called asynchronous view change protocol for hot stuff directly. So they open the box doing different trade-offs, but yeah, have a different type of process. Of course, if you're interested, you can certainly also look at their result as well. Again, we did a bunch of experiments. Maybe I can just quickly go over them. First is latency. And if we check carefully, the both Dumbo Transformer or the BDT is really much closer to the hot stuff family, while this is the Dumbo family. So the Dumbo latency is clearly much higher at a completely different scale. And we would like to know that our experiment actually is done in a kind of pessimistic way, in the sense that we intentionally run transformer once in a while. And we also just validated the overhead of a transformer directly is almost the same as hot stuff. And on the other hand, the throughput is also interesting, because the hot stuff actually, because of the bottleneck of the leader, the throughput, the peak throughput is actually not as good as the asynchronous protocols, because they are actually leaderless protocols. But the BDT kind of carried the best of both. The throughput could be as good as Dumbo, but the latency but much better than hot stuff. And this throughput latency trade-off thing is also interesting. Kind of demonstrated the BDT kind of sit in the middle between hot stuff and Dumbo. So let's the new design space and make it more interesting. One note I would like to make is that here the actual figure should be, the hot stuff should be much closer to the right, because we did the worst case analysis for Dumbo and the BDT, while the hot stuff is done just on the stable leader, the good case. And okay, so as a summary, at the end of the talk, we try to say a few words, like the asynchronous consensus is needed when we consider deploying consensus in the open internet. And we finally come to a stage that there are many theoretical protocols, right? And there's a jungle of asynchronous protocols. We are finally in a stage we can running out of the jungle. And starting from Honey Badger BFT, I try to convince you that flying is faster than running, and flashing is even faster. And one note I would like to make is that the overall structure, as you see, like Honey Badger BFT, the seemingly very simple broadcast and agree structure, right, looks like extremely simple, but actually could be simplified dramatically along the way in different ways. So there are many subtleties actually involved. And since we are now really pushed to the edge, there are still many questions, but we really want to push to the edge. So we need to consider all kind of best trade-off among different complexities, like communication, computation rounds, etc., etc. Well, there's also some remaining interesting theoretical questions. For example, is there any inherent gap between asynchronous consensus protocol and deterministic protocol? The current low bounds are, I believe, they are very loose. The actual gap might be larger, or unless someone can show this lower bound is actually optimal. So it's kind of, I think it's still completely widely open. And now, yeah, since everything live resumed normal, welcome everyone to Sydney, and thanks everyone. And I would like to take questions if you have any. Hope you are still awake.
Actually, Li Qing want to ask a question. Li Qing, you just ask.
Hey, Professor Chen.
Yeah. Hi, Qiang. Yeah, thank you very much for a very interesting and also very informative talk. It's full of stuff. So I have a very simple question, maybe even naive question. How your system set up those parameters? Like how you decided how many honest nodes?
Yeah, like how you set up the parameters is kind of optimal. So because it's asynchronous consensus, we can at the most handle 1/3 of a corruption, right? So the malicious node is 1/3. Yeah, the system
malicious node is 1/3, not less than 50%. Like
no. This is actually yeah, in the asynchronous setting is impossible. right?
Yeah, okay. So 1/3 is fine, but then you need the entities agree your V value, or the V value just coming up automatically after many runs.
Oh, you mean the V value is the one I show in the BDT protocol?
Yeah, the V
right?
value is you show in the page.
Oh, no one knows what the actual. No one knows what's the actual value of V.
No one knows what the
protocol.
V is. Yeah.
They
So
just
V
run the
is
protocol. They output something. Yeah.
Yeah, but how
just
can
for the
they
sake of,
decide that we got enough the complaints? We now should stop.
Then enough complaints 2F plus 1.
Yeah, to V
Just
plus
2F
1. But if I don't know V yet, so how can I?
Oh, no, 2F plus 1, not 2V plus 1. So
okay.
F is known.
But
like
the F is already selected.
Yeah, F is determined.
Yeah,
Like we have
like
200 nodes. F is like 66.
2/3. Yeah.
Yeah.
So F is you select.
F is 1/3. Yeah, F is 1/3. Yeah.
Okay.
And
F is
the number of complaints 2F plus 1. Yeah.
All right. So you don't need an agreed V value. You just let the system coming up.
The V, yeah, the V is different, right? It's the indexing. Let's say just running out of the protocol, but the number of complaint is fixed by F, and this number is fixed.
Okay, yeah. So everybody agreed before the system even start. They know how many nodes altogether, and they know what the F value should be. Then if they see too many complaints and relevant to the F, then say that we should stop.
Yeah. This is more in a permission setting. So in more the conventional permission setting. So N is no and F is no. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, got it. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Right. So I have a question about the malicious nodes. In your experiments, what kind of behaviors the malicious node can do? I can see you have crash, but have you tested other things like lie or send wrong message?
That's a very, very good question. Actually, it's a widely open problem. How do we test BFT consensus protocol with how do we measure the actual malicious node? That's actually an open problem. What we can do best at now is we just mute a bunch of nodes, and maybe you can choose several like adversarial strategy, right? But let's all we have for now. And I think most of the state of the art, at best, they just do crash fault. But that's a very, very important question, I think, but it's still widely open. How do we do the proper evaluation of when for the performance when the malicious node is actually in place? Yeah.
Okay. Another question, maybe I missed it, maybe it's already on the slides, is so when you find the problem, you need to recover from the fault. How long it's going to take to recover? There's only one parameter is start to complain, right? If you don't receive, say in 1 second, I start to complain. When everybody start running the fallback protocol, when one fallback finish, we recover. So how long will this fallback finish?
There's no parameter, right? It depends on how long the fallback runs, right?
Okay.
Depends on actual network, right? If the network is actually recovers quickly, then we recover quickly. If the network is actually very, very bad, then we have to let the fallback mechanism finish.
Okay. Right. So okay, I understand. Okay. Any other questions?
In your system, if a malicious node become malicious and behave like malicious, can every other node find who is a malicious node?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think we didn't make such an assumption at all, but I think there's several recent work consider something called accountability, or maybe detectability. They try to study this type of problem. Yeah, but I think in general it's not clear, right? For example, actually that's one of the classical difficulty of asynchronous consensus, because I simply just silent. Then you don't know I'm malicious or because my network is bad. You cannot distinguish, right? But unless I just intentionally send the two different values to different people, maybe you can catch me. But if just silent, that's hard. Yeah. But there are studies about accountability issues in several recent works, but I think it's also limited because this silent feature just simply cannot be distinguished.
Yeah, silent feature maybe it's like a passive attack. I just listen or I just do nothing. And you allowed some nodes not to do anything.
Not really. Silent actually in the asynchronous setting is more subtle. I can intentionally send a message to you, but do not send a message to Changyu, right? So I selectively silent, make already you two disagree.
Not completely silent.
Yeah.
But those nodes, can they put all their received message together, compare them?
That's what many of the protocols trying to do, right? Many classical protocols is really like voting to all the all-to-all broadcast, many rounds of all-to-all broadcast. Yeah, that's a kind of classical.
Then whole purpose is they needed to agree we all receive the same thing.
Yeah. So the voting procedure is kind of cannot be avoided. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is broadcast easy or even possible?
You mean broadcast or multicast?
Yeah, I mean, on the internet, right? You simply can't do things like in a local area network where you can broadcast, right? You have to do point to point to simulate this.
That's a very good question. Currently, we just do point-to-point broadcast, and I think but there are some primitive like a reliable broadcast, right? They are actually specially designed broadcast protocol can have this reliability guarantee. But if you just do normal multicast like in the P2P network, maybe there are issues in the multicast layer too. Yeah, that's a very good question. But currently, our experiment is only done at maybe 140 scale. If you scale it to 1,000, maybe the issue become visible. Now we haven't checked it yet. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But we do observe using different type of broadcast instances, like in our recent NDS 2022 paper. If you use a cheaper broadcast protocol, then the overhead is going to be smaller. Yeah.
Yeah. But you get less guarantee, I guess.
Yeah, then we need to make other part heavier, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a delicate shift here and there. Yeah.
If you try to use peer-to-peer communication to achieve broadcast, you ask every node to receive something and then distribute what they received to their neighbors, and everybody distributed to their neighbors again. At the end, people got the same picture. So that is traditionally how peer-to-peer work for the multiple parties distributions. But for your unsynchronized one, which seems more tricky because, everybody use their own way to distribute things. It's not in the same speed.
That's true, but even asynchronous network has some minimum guarantee, right? Like any message will be eventually delivered. I don't know when, but eventually, maybe tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
do you have any intervals, like one block calculation is an interval?
So you mean the delay?
Yeah. The delay is inevitable. When you say that now the time is out, every message received is received.
That's a very good question. We currently just based on some heuristics. We just set to be arbitrarily, like 1 second or 2 seconds, but just based on heuristics, you can estimate the current network situation. But let's for our fallback parameter. That parameter, because that influence security, so you can, if you set it to be small, then the fallback probably going to be triggered more frequently, right? If you set it to be larger, then maybe, when it's triggered, you need to wait longer. So kind of trade-off. Currently, it's just heuristic way, but that's a very interesting question. If we can have systematically investigate how to set the parameter to an optimal way. Yeah, that's a very interesting question.